That's a good point. I'll do that. Thank you.
I bet there were like rave parties here. House parties. Just reminds me of those types of after-hour places, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I haven't been to one, but I've heard stories about it. Need to get out there and here. They actually have, like, they just lock this place down just for parties. Like, it's not just like...
Right. Nice.
So if we started making money, I mean, it would stay within that.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming to this meetup hosted by EOS Detroit. I'm Rob Consdorf, and today we've got Steve Floyd with us. He's going to go through the state of blockchain usability. If you don't know what that means, I'm sure he'll explain it for us. So just before we start, thanks again for coming. Is there anyone here who has a problem with being on camera? Because we're live streaming and we've also got some additional cameras floating through the crowd. So if anyone has a problem, just speak up and we won't point the cameras at you. Okay, sweet. And then if you have questions throughout this, if you could walk to the mic that's hanging over here, that'd be great, just so that we can capture the question for the live stream. Because this is streaming live, so people can tune in from around the world. So without further ado, here's Steve Floyd. Thanks for coming. He's all the way from Dallas. Also runs the EOS Tribe block producer. So he's essentially a competitor to EOS Detroit, but you know, we're all trying to build a better future using the EOS technology together. So even though we're competing, we like to share knowledge and pitch in and help each other out. So thanks for coming, Steve, and I'll leave it to you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Like Rob said, my name is Steve Floyd. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer of EOS Tribe. We are a block producer candidate. I have a background in technology going back almost 20 years. I started out in print design in the late 90s. Kind of evolved with the web, because if you were a print designer in the early 2000s, you didn't have a job. You had to code a website. So I kind of just followed the web, you know, and I don't come from means. I don't come from a rich family. You know, I always am very open that I come from a very meek, you know, background, as some people can relate to. And I've found upward mobility through technology in my lifetime. And for those of you who maybe didn't come up with a silver spoon in your mouth, and you maybe look to me as someone who's established or somewhat successful, which I am not by any means, but maybe you perceive me that way, or maybe people out there might perceive me that way. What little grunion I have found in success has been predicated on my understanding of technology and following these, you know, these cycles of, you know, new emerging protocols, new ways of communications and new behavioral models around technology and understanding them. And with that said, this talk I want to be, I may kind of go off the rails a little bit and freestyle. This is kind of an evolving talk that I've been working on for the last 4 or 5 months, and I've gone into different rooms of the house of UX, and I may go into a different room than I did in my last talk, and if I did, don't hold that against me. These are just kind of an evolving framework of ideas that I have tried to venture in to better understand. Would you have to say, Ron?
Just quickly for anyone who might not know, what is UX?
User experience is basically a discipline that has many other little sub-disciplines. You have things like content strategy that deals specifically with content. You have information architecture that deals with how information is structured and organized. And then you have the larger, and there's all different types of, UX disciplines within user interface design, just purely UX design, the overall user experience to UX architecture. And they're largely much of the same type of, thinking, but just different perspectives and more T-shaped in their understanding. And by that I mean just maybe their depth of knowledge for a UX designer is very, or UI designer is very user interface specific. They're dealing with the actual interface design of the app, right? So when I say user experience architecture, that may be something dealing with the entire system design, because, design doesn't stop at what you see. It's the entire stack. It's the error handling. It's the documentation. It's the lexicon and the language you use. It's the entire thing, even the code and how it's documented. That's, if you did not understand what user experience really was as a discipline, it just deals with, those areas of human behavior and context. That human factors would be an older, name for where UX evolved from. And it largely kind of evolved from the last 20, 30 years of the web, because we needed new disciplines to understand these new interfaces and this new technology. We didn't have it before. So that's how UX current day has evolved, and it's still evolving. Much of the things I will present today would seem archaic in 5 years, because our understanding evolves and our behaviors evolve. Even regionally, we think of oh, this is bad UX. Have you ever looked at a Chinese or Korean mobile app? It's horrible by American standards. It's wonderful for them, because we're putting our behaviors and our understandings in their context, and context is a big part of what UX is about. So with that said, let's go into this crypto thing. So this blockchain thing. So in 1.0, back in the, when Satoshi released his white paper, we were like cavemen. We were just happy to have peer-to-peer digital currency. Ooh, we can send money. It was great. It was awesome. We can send value to another person without a bank. And you have a lot of variants. You had a lot of forks that were essentially just forks of Bitcoin. From, obviously here in the logos, you have, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash. These are largely pretty much the same protocol layer and approach with just different variants, they're just a fork with, changing block time, changing little small parameters, or maybe adding on a programming layer like we started to see in the 2.0 phase of blockchain with Ethereum in the mid-2010s. And that era, spawned a lot of cool technology that then allowed us to program our money. We can now put smart contracts on top of that money and set business rules and business logic to that actual, money now. And then we could automate those things that we would have to do manually. I mean, getting your private keys, going into your wallet and sending it to somebody. Why don't I just create a multi-sig wallet and a contract and have that happen automatically by, data points that are checked off and obviously release that money. So I don't have to sit there and micromanage it anymore. So that's just one application. There are many, many applications and variants of that. It's not purely just to facilitate business, but and then now in the 3.0 we have great protocols like EOS emerging. Obviously its precursor Steemit and Cardano and Solana, and these really high throughput protocols that will facilitate, as Dan Larimer said, a way to compete with their modern counterparts. feeless transactions. And they can, like on Steemit, just go to the site, you log in, you register an account, and you're blogging, or you're doing something, whatever that interface or that, dApp facilitates. We would not be able to do modern social dApps with, 50, what is it right now? I think Ethereum, to be exact, I don't have the exact numbers, but not a lot of 40, 50 transactions per site. It's not a huge amount.
What's a dApp?
A dApp is a decentralized application. Okay. So, and I don't know the depth of knowledge of the people here. If I say something you don't understand, just ask. I'll happily answer that and clarify what it is. So if you think of Facebook or Twitter, how could we achieve an update on a decentralized Twitter if we had to go literally pay for that update every single time we wanted to post an update, and then we had to wait 5 minutes for it to post? That's not a good user experience. It's not. So we really kind of hit a barrier until these new emerging protocols have started to emerge, recently, the last few years, to facilitate that type of user interaction.
When it comes to transaction fees, do you think there's kind of a misunderstanding in the market of people thinking that transaction fees are just financial transactions, whereas I think maybe people don't quite understand that if you have a decentralized social media platform like Facebook, that when you click like, that's also a transaction.
Yeah. That every single time you put something on chain, you got to pay gas fees for that on Ethereum. You would have to pay transaction fees for that to happen on Bitcoin. And true, it's permissionless. Anyone can join the network, but there are trade-offs, as with any technology. And you're not going to get all three. You're going to have to make some trade-offs. And that's a fundamental that I would like the larger Ethereum community to understand, is that we at EOS, we used to be Ethereum and Bitcoin, maximalists and fanboys. We love the technology. They have their use cases. If you want title management and you're in Uganda and you can wait 50 minutes or 30 minutes or 10 minutes or however long, depending on how the network is clogged up, that's fine. It has its use cases. You don't want permission for those things. If you want censorship resistance, if you want, permissionless systems, protocols, those are the jam. I mean, that's what you would use. But if you want high throughput and you want free transactions, then we need a system and a way and a mechanism to enable this, a consensus mechanism to actually enable this type of feature that we would expect, or these type of functions, that we would expect from a common dApp, that could compete with Facebook. So I think that, in this third and going into the fourth generation, I hate the 1.0, 2.0, 3.02. It's gotten a little cheesy at this point because people are already front running. Well, we're the 4.0 protocol. We have 700,000 transactions, but we're early. So, with an evolving technology, you can expect our perceptions of that usability to evolve too. So what we talk about here today and what you maybe learn over this little year or two period, be prepared to evolve with that thinking and how we use these systems and how we think about usability in general. Because as you've seen with design trends, if we looked at a mobile app in the early responsive days to current day, night and day. Much better user flows, much better design systems, but we had to get there. And that's going to happen again, and it's going to keep happening. So, with that said, we had platform problems with a lot of these other protocols that really aren't discussed enough, in my opinion, when we have this conversation about the superior protocol, the tribalism that goes on. And, if we just look at some of the proof of work systems, and I'm not even going to name any names, a lot of them, like not just Ethereum or Bitcoin, a lot of them based on that. You have security issues with smart contracts. You have governance problems. You have the scalability and transactions per second. That's what TPS stands for. You have centralized mining. I think if you took out like 4 facilities in China, half the network hash rate would be gone in Ethereum and Bitcoin, which is scary that we've come to that, and even people who are maximalists and the fanboys in those other protocols would admit that too. They're just as mad about it. It's something we're all disappointed about because it's like the Pareto principle that things centralize over time. And we just need to, in this next phase, kind of need to be hyper aware of that and make sure that we don't end up doing much of the same thing. We already see it happening. People, possibly trading votes and and getting into some stuff that would be against the spirit of the network. And it's human nature. You know, it's a problem with us. You know what I'm saying? And we can point the finger, but, you know, I mean, people are going to look out for themselves at the end of the day. And that's something that, you know, we need to reevaluate our incentive models. And, you know, and maybe we didn't get it right this time. It will evolve. And that's all I'm trying to point out, that even us in the EOS community would admit, maybe this isn't the final version. Like there may be many different forks and variants of this, and it will evolve. And maybe we don't have it right now. We're not trying to act like we all have it figured out at all. If anyone ever got that from anyone in EOS, we're like the homies. We're the cool guys you want to go have a beer with. You know what I mean? For real, in the space, like we're not autocratic. We're not super aggressive and arrogant. Like most of us are really like, you know, experienced technologists that have studied this stuff and are just trying to iterate on the next version. And maybe we didn't get it right, but we're doing our best and we're open to feedback. And we're trying to be humble about that for the most part. You know, if you talk to people in the network and the community in EOS, a lot of us would be the first to admit some of these flaws, and we're trying to figure it out too, just like you guys are. And hopefully as a community, we can move away from, you know, this narrative of tribalism and start to think a lot more about the goal of decentralization as a whole, and start to worry a lot more about the usability and the narrative that's being created for this larger movement. And not so much the minutia that we get into, the tribalism and the football issues that, I mean, are really irrelevant if you think about the 10-year technology cycle and not just this year or two period of how much your bag is worth. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, microtransactions and account recovery. So let's take a look at some of the failures. We can talk about the wins of the space, but, you know, big usability problems here, big security problems here. Smart contract security. 34,000 Ethereum, you know, smart contracts containing 4.4 million at the time that I created this. Maybe more now. And ETH may be vulnerable to exploitation. There was a study finding the greedy, prodigal, and suicidal contracts at scale. That was a group of, I believe, Singapore academics and people from Stanford and you know, the School of Computing and the University College of London collaborated on a white paper where they actually tested this stuff at scale, and they found that there's a lot of security problems in these smart contracts that have, I mean, billions of dollars of valuation. And that's super scary, you know what I mean? And we should be concerned about that. And not to mention, when you go out on like DAP Radar and you start comparing, you know, the actual users that use this stuff, that should concern us. You know, that for such a high evaluation, we have such a small amount of actual active user adoption. And the market's, you know, reflecting that. So,
what are some of the security issues?
You can read the white paper. I've got a link right here. You can go. I mean, basically, like Rob could probably actually add to this. They're like buffer overrun kind of stuff where they basically throttle the contract, and then there's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. I'm not like a security or backend developer. I'm mostly front end. So.
The Ethereum expert in the room is Josh. He works for Consensus.
Nice.
But I would say, in general, one of the biggest problems is if you make an oopsie, there's no turning back.
Yeah. That's
like you can just lock out. Like there's examples right now of people accidentally just totally making like $300 million inaccessible.
Gone. Like the DAO.
And
right?
So it's like there's
so
no
the parity wallet
for like it's got too many sharp edges. Like if you make one wrong misstep,
it's gone.
It's all gone now.
So even Ethereum developers and people in the Ethereum community says it's not ideal. Like we need governance. Like they're talking about it too. So it just, we're learning. This is all new stuff. And you know, like I'm not a security expert, but certainly these people are. And when I saw that, I was concerned and just wanted to share it. I'm sure other people, Ethereum, Bitcoin communities, and EOS should all be concerned about that kind of stuff because we're writing smart contracts too with RSK on EOS, and we need to think as a community more so than this division that we've seen that, you know, who's trying to win. So.
Yeah, not even a week ago, there was an exploit on EOS that had about $200,000 stolen.
Yeah, just because they had used, I talked to some of the guys.
One wrong line of code.
Yeah, they were. I mean, they had done some stuff that was not best practice, so they.
When it comes to the smart contract bugs like that, do you think that we're trending towards certifying, like having smart contract auditors and certifying the smart contracts?
Sure. There's already platforms emerging. I think
SageWise.
Yeah, SageWise, like Kanika, you know what I mean? And those guys have come out with a smart contract testing platform. That's just going to take time to flesh out. Like the whole space suffers from lack of security auditing and the resources for that. I would argue that at the type of salaries that these Solidity developers are pulling down, that they could certainly invest a little bit more of that, but you know, it's easy to point the finger, you know what I'm saying? I think ultimately that's something that we need to put first, you know, security as a metric in our space in general. But with that said, let's kind of move down the line here. Centralization. If you look closely at some of the hash rate centralization that I was discussing earlier, you know, I mean, by compare, like people always say this about EOS. EOS is centralized. It is the you know, almost become a religious, like cult level, you know, kind of thing that you hear. And it is so wrong if you really think through it logically. And Dan's right about this, and I'll take you guys through this. So if we look at current hash rate centralization, like I said, you could legitimately take out like 4 facilities in China and like gut the network. You actually could do that. It would continue, but it would be bad. You know what I mean? So you're going to tell me that in one country, one governing body that has that much power in China and Asia, which I have nothing against, it's great that they've invested in the technology, but it's highly illegal. So what would happen if they did stamp out that stuff? Then the censorship that is lauded as so important by the Ethereum and Bitcoin community is null. You know what I'm saying? So let's reverse that and start talking about EOS now. So centralized as compared to what? Go ahead.
Can I ask, could you quickly explain what these graphs mean for people who don't know what
these are? Like percentages of mining pools that own a percentage of the overall hash rate of the network. And that is the nonces that these machines, these mining machines that you've probably seen, solve. They run through these cycles of code and they basically solve a nonce. And that nonce basically unlocks a block, and they're paid a reward for that.
What powers do these mining pools have that need to be decentralized, in your opinion?
I mean, that's kind of a it's the wrong way to think about it, is like if you are speaking from the Puritan view of decentralization, ideally you would have nodes distributed all over the world and plenty of full nodes, and no one jurisdiction would ever have, you know, ownership over that hash rate. When you put all of these mining pools that are running these facilities in China, if you took that out, you're left with that. So that's part of the problem. That's the other side of that debate.
And on that note, these represent, if these graphs were to continue, like that big blue section on the Bitcoin graph, they're going to get 25% of all future Bitcoins.
Yeah, the 51% attack.
So it's centralizing the actual resource to them as well, the future resources that are going to be created to them. And
because they get all of it. So they're one entity that gets all of those rewards and all of those, you know, those block that basically get a Bitcoin, when other people trying to run smaller mining operations have no chance. They have to be part of their mining pool, and they're delegated whatever they decide to. The majority of resources going to them. So with that said, let's jump over to EOS and think this out. So you're telling, go ahead.
Do you know how many, so you say like, those are mining pools, right? Do you know how many like individuals compose that mining pool? Because that mining pool isn't just one organization. Right. It's a bunch of organizations that are colluding.
Right. But I mean, you already know the numbers with Bitmain, and it is super scary. So you know where I'm coming from with that. I don't want to get into like those smaller debates of like, okay, how many individuals, if they were not part of that mining pool, would they still have power? The bottom line is that they still have that brand, that control, and they have the majority of the equipment. So they're in a position to collude and to continue to consolidate. Whether they completely do, that is up for debate. You're quite right. Or is that really the future? I don't know. It might end up that way, though. It's certainly going down that road. And if China wanted to stamp it out, it would be a problem, is all I'm pointing out. So let's jump over to EOS, though, and think that same thought out. You're going to tell me that you're going to take out all 21 nodes across 6 jurisdictions, and then 21 replace them, and then you're going to go stamp out all 21 of those across 8 jurisdictions. Then you're going to stamp, and then those are replaced. It just doesn't. DPoS is, although it does turn into a plutocracy, some of those judgments about the technology are true. You tend to have like people who've consolidated a lot of the coin voting themselves in. The other side of that is it is more censorship resistant than it gets credit for. It is. And if you were being academic in the Bitcoin and Ethereum community, you would be honest about that. And say, actually, it would be a really cluster fail to try to go into all those jurisdictions and kick in their doors and take their equipment. It really, legitimately would. That is a major operation. That's a global level shutdown that I just don't see. We can't get our governments to agree on trade talks and stuff, and we're gonna get them to all lock down the hash rate globally or these nodes. I don't know.
So as far as the Bitcoin and Ethereum token holders, you're saying they have no say in who is mining these pools?
I mean, Ethereum is setting up, delegated proof of stake, and it's basically a consensus mechanism that is more based on the actual token holder voting and engaging and staking with the system versus just a zero-sum game of mining and equipment that you commonly see in like proof of work. So it's just a different approach. I always say this, that different protocols for different approaches. You're trying to solve certain problems, and proof of work and Ethereum and Bitcoin might be more desirable. Maybe you need something in the middle where you want complete censorship resistance and permissionless, but you want kind of a governance layer too, like Ethereum is moving towards. Or maybe you want something that's high throughput, and you're willing to make some trades for centralization and the risk of having your transactions censored if you're doing something nefarious, on the network that you probably shouldn't be doing. We can come up with ideas of that. It's not just gambling. There's some pretty shady stuff that goes on, and I don't know that our chain or a lot of permission chains would allow that to just go on rampant, because then they're liable in their jurisdiction. Our Constitution prevents us from doing that and censoring. We would probably be voted out if we did that. So, so let's kind of move beyond that. But I was just trying to make an argument for our debate for the other side of that we are commonly called centralized in EOS, but to think about like the usability problems associated with that, and that we know we were making trade-offs for some of those things, and we're willing to do that to achieve the goal. That was from the, and then governance issues. Somebody doesn't agree, let's fork. Let's fork. Come on, guys. Like money, we know what it is. You could just come up with it. Well, I don't like what you said. Like fork. It's just.
What if you're blackballed from the club and you fork?
Telos. Which is a great project, by the way. I love what Douglas and you guys are doing. I think you remove the whale's money and they're just not going to like that. You know what I'm saying? And that's just a free market thing. It's unfortunate, but it's your right to do that. It's open source.
We didn't remove anyone's money. We just
the narrative. I'm not saying that.
Smaller gifts to them.
Right,
it's an important distinction.
And I agree. I'm just saying the narrative, like the narrative of what the perception is like, oh, you took our money, and that's not actually what it is. You're correct, but I don't know. That's a whole other debate.
Yeah, I think for Telos in particular, it's not just about the distribution, the difference in tokens within the distribution. It's also about experimenting with less risk.
Yeah. It's not on the mainnet. And Douglas and them have said that from the very beginning. Yeah, they're like, hey, we're also experimenting and trying to see what can work without the whole mainnet risking this stuff. Because what if it doesn't work? And I've heard those conversations from the Telos group firsthand. So I respect what that team is doing, and you guys are doing great work. And if the larger ecosystem and some of those whales were smart, they would see this as a testing ground for what better distributions, different consensus, different modes of validation for the supporting nodes that y'all are talking about would be beneficial. It could actually help the mainnet test these things. So I agree with that side of the debate. I can agree with some of the people who are like, you took our money. It's a tough situation that doesn't have a black and white answer.
What is a fork?
What is a what?
A fork. What's a hard fork? What is that?
What is a what?
Fork.
A fork. A fork is basically where you have a consistent timeline of blocks being produced, and at some point, you basically, decide to branch off with the same version or a different version of that software, and then if it's proof of work, the people that help validate that consensus, like the miners, would mine on that version, and then the older version or a perhaps new version would continue with another set of miners, and those branch off and essentially fork into two different networks.
So it's like how you could have a designer, fashion designer doing a name brand and then go to a lower label type brand.
It could be, but in crypto it's a bit different because that coin could have that protocol or fork could have its own. It may be based on the exact same software, but has one different variant, but they're split into two different communities traditionally. So it's not even like part of the same brand. I mean, there's people like Bitcoin Cash that skew the Bitcoin brand, and a lot of people complain about that because they're kind of riding on the Bitcoin name, some say. I don't try to get into those tribal debates. I just think it's all very interesting. I'm just an observer on a lot of that because it's just, these are new behavioral models, guys. This has not really happened like this before. Any of this stuff. You've never put money and behavioral models together like this and technology like this ever before. We're in the first decade of this. So it's very interesting,
A good example of a fork would be how Litecoin, all they really did was fork the Bitcoin code and they made it faster and lighter. So
they just made a slight adjustment.
A slight adjustment to something and change it.
So it's like
Remember the 1.0?
and then you add
Exactly.
Remember the 1.0 slide that I did where I had like Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin? Those are all largely just based off the Bitcoin code base. They were just forks of that where they would go and adjust one parameter. And some are contentious forks where they're forking like Bitcoin Cash because they didn't agree on larger block sizes. Some are friendly forks, which I would look at like Wordly on EOS's network, where EOS may not be able to service KYC or AML in the short term. They can't wait around for that. They can't wait around for these dApps to be built. Like they need to launch their product, and they made that decision, and it wasn't contentious. They have a different approach, and I would argue Telos is a friendly fork too. Some people don't see it that way, but I agree that it is a friendly fork. No one's trying to be mean.
People within Telos want to be friendly. It's up to the people who don't view Telos positively to come around.
Absolutely. Human behavior. I have no idea how to solve that one. So, if we look at actual adoption and throughput, and this is not super current, EOS is ranked, much, I believe, Steemit. And people always say this to me, and it frustrates me, and they're like, well, EOS has no use case, it hasn't proven itself. We don't even know if it's going to be viable. And I'm like, have you heard of Steemit or BitShares? That's been a working community functioning with this throughput and supporting the same, those were specific versions. EOS is just a generalized version of that graphene underlying kind of technology. And graphene is, like I said, the underlying technology that allows this delegated proof of stake system to work.
I think this picture is outdated, right?
Right now, EOS was like #1 until they gray listed. EOS was like #1 adopted, and I'm just showing you this site. You can go get like current stats on Blocktivity. Everyone references this, but if you haven't seen it, I advise for the handful of you here that may not have seen it to definitely just go look at the stats, and that's very telling. Now, the other side of that argument, just to be contrarian, are transactions purely a metric of whether or not you have real adoption? I would argue that overall user engagement, and you can go to DApp Radar /EOS and actually look at those metrics too. And currently, the #1 DApp on EOS Bet, does more transactions in volume than the top 5 Ethereum dApps combined. So Steemit, BitShares, use cases that work. Generalized version in EOS, the very first app that launches within it in 60 days, has more user adoption than all other 5 dApps. I think that's a pretty good narrative for us so far, right?
Yeah, just some more interesting things on EOS Bet. They've already done $150 million worth of EOS and wagers in their first month. They've only been around for a month.
A month. I mean, I'm not saying that we're winning the game yet. I mean, I think that we have a long way to go as far as developer adoption, user adoption, and dApps, but I definitely think that we're showing promise. You know what I'm saying? That the Ethereum community should move away from specifically because we've been the ones not getting along, you know, traditionally. And if we just move away from that narrative, like, and start trying to shape a narrative of, you know, okay, well, how can we learn from each other and actually, like, help move this forward, that's a productive use of our time, in my opinion. But,
it's maybe a little off topic, but do you think that gambling apps are the best way to maintain that adoption?
no, not at all.
I feel like it opens up a lot of outside criticism.
Well, what are the top
blockchain.
Ethereum? Hold on a minute. You got to juxtapose that with the fact that Ethereum has some of the same problems. It's just early stuff. It's early. We're early.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying trying to juxtapose it with Ethereum, but I'm just saying with blockchain in general, I feel like a lot of the things that
Does that make us look good?
Yeah, like a lot of the things that gravitate towards blockchain, unfortunately, are the things that will bring a lot of outside terrestrial attention to us. Right?
And didn't that happen on the internet? It was porn and casinos at first, guys. That's what you commonly see in early technology. The criminals and the weirdos are the first ones to adopt this stuff because they're estranged from the traditional system. So we're going to see that. And it's up to us to create a system that invites everybody. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, and that starts with usability. So basically, if we move into the academic side of this debate, recently Brian Levine presented, you know, graphene as a solution to scaling Bitcoin. So if this was not viable, and I think those of you in the Bitcoin and Ethereum communities that are, you know who Brian is, he's one of the top guys for this stuff. You know, I mean, he is, like, literally, you can't argue with some of their, you know, academic debates about this. It is really bleeding edge on, and if they're looking at it, maybe we should just open up the debate a little more at this point, is all I'm saying. I'm not trying to poke, I'm not trying to prod. I'm not, like, and that's what I think we all have a responsibility for, any of us, is to be respectful. They can be mean to us. We need to be the better people. We need to be the example. That's how we get respect, not through being tribal and rude. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I've had a few times. I had a few townies in my hometown get, you know, tribal with me, and I've reacted, you know what I'm saying? I've not been perfect, but overall, I've kept my composure, and I would ask other leadership in the space to do the same. It would help all of us. So, you know, but the average blockchain user, like, this is what we're dealing with. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's just be 100% real about this. Like, we are early. We are so early. You know, and if we don't address those underpinnings, the psychology, the incentive models, and the way our lexicon, the way we communicate with each other, and the usability, we're screwed. This thing isn't going to work. You know what I'm saying? They're going to get ahead of it, like you mentioned. They're going to co-opt it at some point, and it's going to be largely an elitist kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? It's not, we're not going to see the adoption. It's going to be like the electric car kind of thing, where it just kind of drolls on for 20 years, and we don't quite get the traction to make this stuff work quite like our initial vision. And but that is all going to happen around good usability. That's why I say that we need to think, instead of the state of blockchain, we need to think about the state of blockchain usability and all this. It would help the space and help educate these people, because they're chasing, you know, gains and not the fundamentals. Okay?
So something I've been sort of debating with, you know, right now, blockchain in general is going through the state of 3 token types: your cash model, your utility, and other securities.
Peer-to-peer
model thing,
yeah.
Right. So you think that will have an effect on sort of maybe filtering out? Right now, everybody's just sort of in the crypto space, even though they have different sort of priorities. Do you think that separation of token models will maybe take some?
I think that's largely just, you know, integrating with the incumbent system in ways that, you know, we fear that we are going to be put at their door and end up having to basically just Visa 2.0, right? You know, state channels, Lightning Network, you know what I mean? Like some of these scaling models. Whereas I think that it's going to be more like I said this at Tulip, and I'll say it again. It's not their job to make it easy for us. It's our job to get our stuff together and to integrate with the system in a way that meets those standards, but also makes them come to the door. You know what I'm saying? Because it's going to be, you know, an overlap. It's not going to be perfect. We're human. We're totally screwed from the beginning. You know, like, if humans touch it, you can bet it's going to be messed up at some point. So, like, I don't know if you're raising your hand. Anybody have any questions before I move to the next slide? So, you know, the other thing that I think is interesting about, and this is super like minutia, and it's just my opinion, but you know, how bad usability can confuse users and actually like empower scammers themselves, because we haven't addressed these barriers from the interfaces on existing platforms, and just, you know, you've seen this before. We've all seen someone offering a big ETH promotion, and you know what I mean? People get confused, they send their money out, and they get scammed. And they can't get it back because they don't have a governance layer to retrieve it. So that's another problem that besides account recovery, that EOS is working towards, besides a file system, and this kind of Amazon cloud, you know, kind of thing for the blockchain. That's permissioned, but as long as you play by the rules, and that's just to mitigate Sybil attacks. It's not like there's a reason that was done if you really dig into it, you know what I mean? But it doesn't mean you can't go get a friend to create an account or go get a Faucet account or get an account. That's not that big of a barrier. It's not. Even the account cost is lower than it was when RAM fees were really high. Go ahead.
There isn't walls, there's recourse. That's the difference. It's not permission, because permission implies whitelisting and walls.
Right.
It's governed.
It's governed.
There's recourse. It's open. But if you don't play by the rules,
it's a better way to frame it.
Yeah, so it's really, I always try to make that correction, because a lot of people are going towards saying EOS is permission.
Permission,
it's
right.
not.
Just because it has an account layer, but if you really want to get, that's kind of what I was trying to convey. That's a better, that's a more concise way to say it, is that's really subjective. Have you seen how easy it is to get an account? You can get an account. If you're doing something shady, then you have something to be worried about. Is that fundamentally centralized? I mean, what are you doing? Like, is it against the Constitution? It's a governed blockchain. That's part of the deal. You know what I'm saying? That's part, I mean, break the deal, face the wheel. So, bad UX can be very expensive. You know, at the time of this, I think it's actually more now, 3.79 million Bitcoins are gone for good based on a high estimate, and 2.78 based on a low estimate of how many people just lost their keys. And they're gone for good. And they have no way to get that back. That's a problem. Like, that's a problem. You know what I'm saying? That's a significant problem in the space, and that scares people. Investors, the custodians that run the accounts even are very scared of the people they hire to handle this stuff at these, you know, hedge funds in Chicago that were doing, you know, hedge fund stuff, and, you know, are now heavily into crypto asset management. And I went to you know, distributed markets and saw the SEC guys present on this and talk about it, and they want integration. It's just like, it does have to protect, you know, the actual investor. And like I said, we need to think about that and not be, so many people are just like, banks suck, screw banks, I'm so fundamentally, I'm against centralization of any form that leads to corruption. I'm not so much against like a bank being a custodian of my ledger that's got like $5 million on it one day, if I ever, you know, if I ever am lucky enough to get that kind of, you know, kind of gain. Yeah, I mean, there is a role for banking establishments. They just need to evolve. It's not so, and centralized banking and centralized systems need to start being absorbed by DACs. Those people that commonly, those positions of power that are so commonly co-opted and corrupted, that joint needs to be a DAC and transparent. Everything else can be people under it. There can be people above it. But that one part where people collect and steal the money, make that auditable. And that's, I think, a middle ground of working within that framework.
What is a DAC?
Decentralized autonomous company, decentralized autonomous organization in a DAO context. It was, and I believe it was originally in like 2013, 2014, Dan Larimer talked about it at an Atlanta conference and brought the idea up, and the guys from Dash actually run it. You know, the founders of DAC were like, that's awesome, and we're going to do it today. You know what I'm saying? And they did it, and they did an excellent job. But if you really want to get back to the thought leadership of who really has come up with these ideas, Dan's the man for a reason. So where do we go from here? And that's what I'm going to ask you guys. Where do you think we should go to drive adoption and usability for the blockchain? I'll switch this talk on you, and let's just go around the room and ask all of you what you think, good or bad. Go ahead.
I mean, just kind of like how you're talking about how like a lot of like the internet started out as kind of porn and gambling. The next kind of adopters a lot of times were like gaming industries for a lot of the internet usage originally, and I see that being a good tool, blockchain especially for multiplayer games using the blockchain technology. I think a good adaptation from just pure currency standpoint, kind of where it's still at right now. Even smart contracts are still basically passing one thing back and forth. And that's obviously a centralized use of the blockchain. Let the developer create their own blockchain for the game universe, basically. And I know there's a lot of people out there kind of working on those ideas right now, but I'm not too into it. But that's where I kind of see one of the bigger developments coming from. I think
Games,
people will
like
get creative.
moving out of just porn and casinos into at least some games, like, because that's kind of like phase 2. I would totally agree with that. And we're seeing that quickly, though. You got to admit, Knights of EOS, EOS Knights, excuse me, you are starting to see that. And I think that over this next year, it'll happen more rapidly on EOS than we've seen on other chains. Like there was a similar, people evolving. I think there's a Loom Network, which is basically EOS on Ethereum. You get the permissionless and censorship resistance with the benefits of DPoS, graphene under the hood, once again. So I would just ask, this is one thing that I want to see from that, like, because there's an underlying thing there. To get the engineers to really facilitate that, we need to move away from that tribalism that I talked about. Like that is a part of what's keeping that division of getting more Ethereum developers and some newer EOS developers who are newer to blockchain or just as brilliant to actually see we actually have a lot in common and that we really could benefit a lot from just being cool. Just being cool with each other, just being cool, just like Dan and Vitalik are trying to lead the charge. It's not like Charles. Charles is very divisive. He can be a jerk sometimes. He would probably be the first to admit it. You know what I mean? And he just, there's some arguments maybe he just doesn't like, and it's his prerogative to voice his opinion. Him and Dan don't get along about certain stuff. But, Vitalik and Dan have shown a lead on how we need to move forward in this conversation, and that's all I want to see for what he's talking about. That if our developers started working together, these new breed of like enterprise guys coming in EOS, and I know the Ethereum community is like, fuck, like shit, whoa, those guys, like y'all are coming in now? Like why didn't y'all come over here? Because the throughput wasn't there, and we largely, a lot of those guys want to build like enterprise dApps, like high throughput dApps. So let's mix it up. Like let's figure out how we can come up with oracles and different systems to have inter-blockchain communication and the best of both worlds. So.
Yeah, I would say.
Because Ethereum isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, and I would say sort of on that point, I'm starting to look at the protocol levels more like OS, Windows, Android. I think it's like knowing what you're selling, right? If you
because people don't want to care that it's a damn blockchain. They just want to use the dApp. Like they don't care that it's a blockchain.
Developer, I use the McDonald's example all the time. If you want to compete with McDonald's and you get into the hamburger business, you've already lost because they're not in the food business.
Yeah, they're in the real estate business.
Right, and it's the same thing. If you want to be a developer, develop something that the average person can use regardless. Mm-hmm. And as protocols for EOS, Ethereum, all of them,
and
they should be working on,
yeah.
like you said, oracles, ways for developers to be able to port.
Right. Inter-blockchain communication, like ways for us to be more fluent, and these are just different protocols to solve different problems. He had a question, and another guy in the back had a question. I apologize you didn't get heard. Can he go first?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead. Thank you. So I'm going to preface this by saying that I'm a technologist, but I don't think this is a technology problem. I mean, everything that we've talked through here is
people problems. Yeah.
So
which is the whole point of my talk. Usability.
Well, so is it that the ecosystem is not diverse enough? Is it the fact that we haven't invited enough people to the table that have different disciplines, right? So as we're trying to engineer a solution, perhaps we need to have, let's say, anthropology give us a solution, or psychology, or economics.
I think it starts, and this is something me and Kevin Owaki from Gitcoin, have debated in Denver area. We had a big spat, in a group, but I have a lot of respect for the work that he's done, and he's a devout Ethereum guy, and I think the conclusion that we came to is that we need to start having more academic debates and focusing more on education and a common lexicon, and that's the bedrock that these usability problems can be solved from. So, you know, I'm not saying it'll be perfect. We'll have our bumps and bruises along the way, but I just see a more like holistic, inclusive approach, like you're saying overall, if we focus on the people problems more so than just the technology. You gotta have good tech. The tech is first, but right next to it is, you know, not community. I hate that. Like, I hate where it's like, because that's just this, that's like the hallmark of a shitcoin. You know, we put community first. Like, okay, like, what's the tech? I'm saying even tiered with usability research and real user flows and the actual like design, you know, kits and the templates and the frameworks that we use to speed this stuff up and understanding what is crypto? What is delegated proof of stake? Like, what are these concepts and how can they empower you and your communities? You raise your hand?
Yeah, I think in all of this, what you've highlighted is the fact that we deal with object permanence much better than, let's say, a logical construct permanence.
Right.
And so the logic break that happens in, we talk about our grandmas, right? And, I actually talk about my mom, but basically they struggle with a lot of these concepts with the point and click and the frickin' computer, which is
like
why
people in the early
mobile
internet
works
did.
so much better because
Same way.
it's bringing a physical layer to it, and I think that's the problem that we can help solve. That it's a combination of identity, being able to say I trust this because I can see, smell, taste, touch, whatever it is, but also the fact that it creates an analog concept to perhaps something else that they've experienced, something that you don't need to have a manual for because you've experienced it elsewhere in life.
I agree. Absolutely.
It'd be great if you could show us how to solve that in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest mountain we need to climb. You know what I'm saying? As far as like, as an entire ecosystem, not just like EOS. Just, having a secure way to protect people from themselves, account recovery. Some of the things EOS is addressing that are going to be very hard at the wallet level for most other protocols. You know what I'm saying? At least it's like Dan said, I mean, trying to evolve or fix like Ethereum is like trying to work on a moving car. It's tough. They have a hard problem. They're doing it. They're making progress. It's brilliant work, but it's tough. I've always said Vitalik should branch out into other projects and look at other ways to experiment. Himself, you know what I'm saying, about ways to solve problems. I would be very interested in a 2.0 complete rescrap of where he was at now. You know what I mean, though? Like, for real. Like, then EOS should be afraid, just like Ethereum has been with what we're doing. If they really did a reboot of the network or a major fork and just restarted on a lot of things, they could address some of the stuff just as well or better. You know what I'm saying? So, I don't know that will happen because there's so much invested and it's a big deal. So I don't know, but I mean, it's not that anyone from the EOS community is saying that Ethereum couldn't solve that problem if they were positioned to. We just had a little later start and learned from that, which was part of my talk, is how can we get the best of both worlds at some point as a community.
It's funny because if you look at the history, it's actually an earlier start. It's just a longer play.
Yeah, it took Dan a little while.
Dan said in 2014, Dan Larimer, the guy who invented EOS, or the architect.
You did the Dan said. You did it.
Yeah, he said, I want to build a smart contract platform. It's not time yet. Let's do some research first and then deploy it.
Which
and
Charles
EOS
gives him
is
a hard
that
time for not
focus.
doing that, but he did.
So it's interesting, a lot of people don't have the history straight because they came in post Ethereum and just learned about Ethereum.
Right. I mean, and I'm not saying that BitShares and Steemit was not already addressing this stuff. And I remember Dan argued with Satoshi himself about this stuff in the Bitcoin Talk forums. If you go back to the history, so he's been thinking about this for a very long time, and that's something that's often planted in this argument that we didn't do our academic research. And I believe it's been a mix. I believe it's been trial and error with academic research to get to this point of a generalized platform that the platform's not fully getting credit for. But it's not perfect. With that said, it's still not perfect. We know it. We're getting pretty close, though. This is looking good. We're moving in the right direction. And that's what I would hope that the larger conversation is had, about this.
In your opinion, I think an issue is even, you sort of hinted at this earlier, even getting our definitions straight. When you
Common language.
When I say decentralization, and I go on a spiel about it, me and Rob might go back, and never have, but we could go back and forth maybe for days, because he's talking about a whole different idea of decentralization than I. We're not even having we're not using the same dialogue.
Yeah, that's what, I put in the GitHub repo that Owaki created with Luke Stokes about this, trying to create, very first thing I suggested about including EOS in the mix. He made a pull request, basically a repo for all the different arguments and all the different academic citations to try to point to, when we have these arguments in the community, to point to the source information about what's real versus what's hyperbole. You know what I mean? And I think that would, coming up, and that's the very first thing I suggested, is a glossary. Remember when we took your glossary and expanded on it like 8 pages. It was like 1-2
You made it
pages.
pretty.
Yeah. No, we made it pretty, and we added about 7 pages to it. So, you know what I mean? And I think Phil Mesnier, wherever you're at, Phil, thank you for adding the really heady definitions in there. And Phil himself did work on that. We just need all of our good engineers and stewards of our communities to be better leadership to enable these network effects that we want, and it's disappointing to see us argue about stupid stuff, like, because we already fight in our own communities. I see it in Ethereum, I see it in EOS, like, we already have our own internal battles. We don't need to fight with each other. We at least need to be good neighbors, at least like, okay, we're cool, like, we don't agree on this, but we agree to disagree, kind of thing, that would help other people look at us and go, man, maybe I want to get involved with this. This looks pretty cool. Like, these guys are sharp, they're thinking about what they're doing. And
it's so hard because money's involved.
Oh, totally.
In most other industries, like,
People's
I don't
backs
think it
aren't
would
on the
be
money.
as hard, but like in this industry, we're literally talking about new money, and so everyone wants their new money to win.
Totally.
Because they have self-interest, right? They want to provide for their family and all the things, so it's like, we have to be intellectually honest and put all of that aside and have the real academic debates, as you're saying.
Right, and even if everybody doesn't understand every nuance of what we're saying, to just see leadership in their local communities, in their regional communities, in their national and international communities, be good people. Just be legit business people that are doing stuff the right way. You know what I'm saying? And not this, emotional stuff that we see because people have got $50 million, $100 million on the line, and their bags. And when you stick to fundamentals and you stop focusing on charts, so much, it's good to know the price. It's good to hedge and make sure that you have good investment, and strategy, but don't get so caught up into it that you lose track of the fundamentals. It's just a balance like anything else. You know what I'm saying? And that's all I would hope. If we're trying to get to real adoption and usability, we get out of that kind of mindset, at least in this phase. It may take another 6-8 years, but I do see we can get our stuff together a little bit. I do see a future where the guys who are the big masterminds and, the thought leaders now, they're going to go out to pasture, and they're going to be the old guys. And a lot of us that you're seeing today are going to be the new thought leaders. And a lot of us want kind of the narrative that I'm talking about is just something a little more, level-headed and not so stuck on our bags. I mean, I can understand when the price dips, it sucks, what I'm saying? I don't care who you are. We're all hurting when that happens, but we're not putting that first in this larger goal of decentralization because the people, they do follow us. They do. These people look to us for leadership, and if we're just cool to each other and we're responsible and we've got our stuff together, I think it'll help the space with good usability. So. Anybody else?
I would just also add to that, I come from a background in entertainment. I used to tell artists all the time, you can't be an artist for the artist and be successful, no matter what your art is. Artists, rappers who rap for rappers, or writers who write for other writers, and they're overly intellectual. And it's the same thing in space. You have a lot of developers who are developing for developers.
Right. Yeah.
And also from a business background, we need more. Neil deGrasse Tyson types, which would be like the Andreas types, people who aren't necessarily deeply financially invested. They're good communicators. Andreas isn't back there building
heavily invested, he's not.
But he is a good communicator, and that way Jimmy could focus on developing and teaching developers and let somebody else teach.
Which is probably what Jimmy would rather be doing anyways. He doesn't want to be out doing all this, arguing about this stuff. He's put into these positions because he's knowledgeable, but probably he wants to be educating developers and just teaching, and not be caught up in all this hype and stuff. Developers don't like that stuff. They don't want to be up in some high level position dictating all this stuff and this narrative. They want to just be doing the work, and digging into the technology largely. So I think that's another problem is we have the wrong types of people who've been put in these positions just because they're knowledgeable, and we've made them into that when they might not be the best people, and they would even admit it. I bet if you talk to Jimmy, you'd be like, I don't want to be doing all this crap. They asked me to do it, and I do it, but I'm not good at this stuff. I'm a developer. I look at the technology, and I believe what I believe. And it's not so much a zero. I just don't like the zero-sum game that it's turned into. You know what I mean? In the whole conversation, and that's... people's got their bags in it, so they're gonna be looking that direction. So. Anybody else? Am I done? Can I get it?
Nice job, Steve.
Nice. Thank you.
Just a heads up. Thanks everyone for coming. We have a bunch of free